So as I heard that song today, it was like hearing it for the first time. And in many ways, it was hearing it for the first time, because as a kid, I sang Jackaroo Deo, or something like that. And so that today, honestly, sadly enough, is the first time I heard the chorus sing properly. And I know there's entire websites out there, you know, Bad Moon Rising became there's a bathroom on the right. And, you know, looks like tomatoes instead of looks like we made it. There's lots and lots of things that we sing as kids that we find out later, oh, it's something entirely different, isn't it? And so the nothing's going to change my world is very comforting when we take it as the nothing's going to change the world of the oneness within us. Because everything's changing in our outer world, right? The only thing you can pretty much count on is that it'll change. It's like the weather in New England. So last week I had somebody bring to my attention another way of looking at Jesus the Christ. You need to understand that when we say Jesus, we are fully aware that Christ is not his last name, it's a title. And for us, Jesus was what we call the master teacher. But Howie was good enough to bring to me and allow me to share another way of looking at this teacher that has become such an icon in our world. So according to what he shared with me, there are 3 good arguments that Jesus was black. He called everyone brother. He liked gospel. And he didn't get a fair trial. Oh, but then there's also 3 equally good arguments that Jesus was Jewish. I mean, other than the obvious. He went into his father's business. He lived at home till he was 33. And he was sure his mother was a virgin, and his mother was sure he was God. Arguments that Jesus was Italian. He talked with his hands. He had wine with his meals, and he used olive oil. Jesus might have been a Californian. He never cut his hair, he walked around barefoot all the time, and he started a new religion. Or maybe he was Native American or American Indian. He was at peace with nature, he ate a lot of fish, and he talked about the Great Spirit. Equally good arguments that Jesus was Irish. Never got married, always telling stories, and he loved green pastures. But the most compelling evidence of all, and remember that this came to me from Howie, 3 proof that Jesus was a woman. He fed the crowd at a moment's notice when there was virtually no food. He kept trying to get a message across to a bunch of men who just didn't get it. And even when he was dead, he still had to get up because there was work to do. Now, I'll just remind you guys that I did that with Howie's permission. And yes, I'm going to continue to say Howie's name over and over so that you guys recognize that that was his fault. So here's the thing. Everybody wants to claim, you know, in this Judeo-Christian civilization that we're all part of, whether we like it or not, we all want to claim Jesus. Jesus is on our side. How many battles have been fought where both sides, each side, claim that God was on their side? Onward, Christian soldiers. Huh? To me, that doesn't make sense. The Prince of Peace, which is one of the ways of talking about Jesus, I can't see him going to war. For me personally, it's an image that doesn't make sense. And yet, what I'm really willing to do is say that other people are going to have other ways of looking at the divine. My way is not the only way. Our way is not the only way. We say that at the beginning of every single service. Our way of being together spiritually is not the only way to do it. And so I want to extend blessings and thanks to the people on YouTube for being here, as well as everyone who is physically here. In the tradition I grew up with, this is Palm Sunday. And it's a celebration of Jesus coming into the city of Jerusalem, knowing that he was going to be crucified. But that's not till next week, so we'll get there. But he came into Jerusalem, and everybody was singing Hosanna to him. Everybody was celebrating him coming in. And as I went through this week, I kept having the image of kind of like the red carpet treatment. And all of those people on either side. All of those different people with all their very different lives. And it occurred to me that Jesus, while he is a representation of our own soul, because the Christ lives in all of us, so were the people celebrating on either side, who had no idea what was coming. So there's something, when we're going to celebrate diversity, we have to be willing to celebrate all of it. Not just tolerate. Once upon a time, there was a great deal of talk about how we tolerate multiple, whoops, I'm bleeding. That's not supposed to happen until next week. That could get taken the wrong way, couldn't it? Okay, I'm going to dig my way out of this one somehow. We'll be editing that out of the YouTube part, right? It's Howie's fault. Yes, like this. Did I have a point? So Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, which is the city of peace, a place of peace, in order to celebrate his tradition of Passover. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus was a Jew not just who was observant, but who was of the house of David, one of the ruling families. He got called rabbi, lots. And so his Jewish tradition was huge to him, but I, being raised as a Christian, didn't know anything about Passover. The outer form changes. The inner Christ is what will not change. Metaphysically speaking, Passover is said to have been used by Jesus to represent the freeing of the spiritual man from the dominion of sense. That could take the wrong way too, couldn't it? He meant the five senses, not just good common sense. The freeing of the spiritual man from the dominion of the senses. It is the passing over or out of one state of consciousness into another. Jesus was going into a place of peacefulness in order to celebrate the rising up of his consciousness. Now, when we read the Judeo-Christian scriptures or any scripture, what we know is that we're reading them as allegories for our own spiritual truth. Allegories for the growth of a soul which is also ours. The universal soul of which we are a part. And so when Jesus went to celebrate Passover, there's the tradition of why is this night unlike every other night? There's a special food. There's the eating of the unleavened bread, because that's what the Jews ate when they were escaping Israel, and they were out in the desert for 40 years. And so the manna fell from heaven. I feel like I'm trying to remember the last season of Game of Thrones here. Because the Old Testament can be read as just about as bloody. So at the end of Genesis, which is the first book of what I was raised calling the Old Testament, it has other names. At the end of Genesis, Joseph, with his coat of many colors, has brought his family into Egypt so they don't starve to death. Egypt was a good place to be in the midst of the famine. But over the generations, the Jews that had come into Egypt were doing really, really well. And the rulers of the time started getting nervous, thinking that they were, these immigrants are going to come take over our country and our jobs, right? So they went to fear, and what they did was turn the Israelites, or the Jews, into slaves and began treating them very badly. And so Moses, the story of Passover is the story of Moses going to the Pharaoh, not that he wanted to, he tried to get out of the job. He went to the Pharaoh and convinced him, slowly and with many, many plagues, to get out, to let my people go, is what he said. That's the very first part of the next book of the Bible. The end of Genesis, they have found a place of safety. You open it up, the very next page, the place of safety has become something that is no longer safe. And so on Passover, the Jewish tradition is to remember their days of being unsafe and enslaved and how they got out of it. Now, you might think that that has nothing to do with you. But have you ever been moving from one place in your life and trying to grow out of it and keep going back? Like, who put that Ben & Jerry's in the fridge? Freezer? I know I started a diet this morning, but somebody bought more ice cream. For most of us, the story of our soul trying to become more conscious is one of getting a little better and then falling back, and getting a little better and then falling back a little. And we don't realize that as we're moving forward, we're gaining ground all the time. Once you have awoken, once you have achieved an awareness of your own Christ self, you can never go back to where you were. So even on the days you think you have now messed up, and yesterday you were doing so well, and then you wake up this morning and, oh dear God, what happened? You can take comfort in knowing and remembering your days in the desert when Spirit provided manna for you. So, there is a growth that happens in our spiritual lives. And when we come here, we have said yes to growing up spiritually. Whether you're here this Sunday morning, whether you're watching this video in a month or a year, the story is the same. We remember that in our humanity, we are remembering our Christness. I was taught in my metaphysical Bible class in ministerial school that the reason Moses could not make it past the desert into the promised land, the reason it took them 40 years to get through that desert, wandering around in circles, is because the consciousness takes time to change. And the consciousness of one who is enslaved to old ideas cannot live in the land of milk and honey. Moses could never cross over into the land of milk and honey. He could only see it. So the part of your soul that is represented by Moses needs to get left behind, even if it was a hero at one point. The Jesus that came in being celebrated on Palm Sunday didn't stop there. He moved on and did other things. After he had celebrated Passover, he went to a place at the foot of the Mount of Olives called the Garden of Gethsemane. Does anyone remember that story? Okay. He went to the foot of the Mount of Olives, which is important because that's where they took the olives and squeezed them in order to make the oil, which was a holy thing for them. But once again, we have a symbol that tells us that which has been good might need to get mushed in order to squeeze out the important part. That thing that you are right now, as beautiful and good as it is, might need to get left behind so that your essence can go forward as a holy oil, can go forward as, half of my family is Arabic, so olive oil is always holy oil. We put it on everything. There is a recurring theme here of letting go of what has been, no matter how beautiful it was, and going into a place. It might even be scary to walk into this place where you're newly olive oil and you used to hide out very safely in your olive, and now you have to go forward. Another place that symbolism is that Jesus went to prayer, and in the midst of his pain, he asked that that hour may pass from him. My copy of the Bible that I use is actually translated by George Lamsa, who's an expert in Aramaic. So sometimes it comes out a little differently than what I'm used to. He, in his moment of conscious awakening, was in pain. And so he turned to his friends and said, "Wait here for me while I pray. But wait for me. I need you guys. I need you to have my back." And 3 times he went back to them and they had fallen asleep. They'd fallen asleep. These people who loved him, that he was counting on for support. And so his call was, will you stay awake with me? Will you walk into this conscious experience, painful or celebratory, with me and grow? And he acknowledged that though their spirit was willing, their flesh was weak. It's hard to walk into a higher consciousness consciously. Have you noticed that? Yeah, okay. A few people are like, yeah. And it can be really hard because the people around you may not get it. They may go back to sleep. It might be hard to look. I had a cold a couple weeks ago, and I've had people say, "You're a religious science minister, how can you get a cold?" I'm like, with alarming regularity. We are fully divine and fully human at the same time. And other people may not understand our process. And that's why it keeps coming back to us in this different scriptures all around the world and in different ways within the Judeo-Christian story. And this week, I had my own Garden of Gethsemane moment. And I'm going to share it with you. And what I'm going to ask you to do as I talk is just notice the parts of you that are going, "Oh God, oh that can't be true." Notice the parts of you that get defensive. Nah, I'm not like that. Really, I'm not. I was invited, as all the ministers were, to do a Zoom call. There were 2 Zoom conferences going on at the same time. One was for people of color, so that they could stop being marginalized and learn how to take center stage in their own lives, which is where they belong. Yes? The other one was for people who were not considered of color. And yes, there were huge arguments about what to call us. They settled on white folks because it was short. Some people are really offended by that. I'm not. I think it's cute. There was another one about how to go from bystander to ally. And because I am who I am, of course I signed up for that. Of course I did. I'm going to take a couple hours out of my day to stand with my brothers and sisters consciously. Signed on to the wrong one. And when we broke out into small groups, luckily a friend of mine was in it, and he was about to text me. I made a comment about how weird it was that I was the only white person in the room, and how disappointed I was in all of my brother and sister ministers that they couldn't take 2 hours out of their night. And so God bless Masando. Reverend Masando Hiroka was going to text it to me, but ended up saying it to me. Well, that's because this group is a safe place for people of color to talk without having anyone intrude. So in my humanity, I was just like, oh my God, I am so, so sorry. Because I was intruding on their safe space. I was out of line, so of course I hung up. Which is what they wanted me to do in the first place. They were all lovely to me. They didn't say anything against me, of course. And I was intruding in their space. Now, what do you think I did next? Sign on to the other one? No, I did not. I went in my room and hid because I was embarrassed. And we're laughing about that, aren't we? That, ladies and gentlemen, is white privilege at work. That was me not even noticing that I can duck out of those conversations anytime I want because I'm white. That is me just kind of falling back into my safe and easy space and not going on to what I said I wanted to do. I fell asleep while the Christ in me was still at prayer. Yes? So of course, we don't stop there, because sometimes God puts neon around my big signs and arrows pointing to them. There was a gentleman by the name of Kyle Korver who plays for the Utah Jazz. He's a basketball player. Does anyone know who that is? Okay, I'm not. Okay, yeah, yay! He wrote an article called Privilege. And he talked about, while he was playing on a team in New York, his friend, he just refers to him as Thabo, was coming home. They were out there for a couple of games, and Thabo was coming home from a night at coming home from a party at a club, and he was stopped by police, and while they were arresting him, they broke his leg, which is very, very bad for a basketball player or anyone else who plays sports. And what Kyle is noticing is that while it was awful, it kind of fell away from his mind. Except to remember that if he had been the one walking out of the club, he would have been perfectly safe. Mr. Thabo, or I don't know if it's first name or last, I'm sorry, ended up suing the New York City Police Department and winning because they had nothing on him. There was it was an illegal stop. They had overdone it with the adrenaline, and he ended up spending a night in jail. Men of color are, I want to say, 4 times more likely to be taken to jail than a white person. It's just a truth. Now, breathe with me. Those of you who are looking at me like, where the hell is she going? I want to talk about Easter eggs. We're talking about Passover, people. We have in each of us the ability to face our own crucifixion. The Christ within us has no fear of crucifixion because we know that we're eternal. We as religious scientists are called into this great awakening. And in this room, it's easy to talk about. It's easy to read something funny about Jesus. It's easy to have these conversations, just like a ship in port is safe. But that's not what ships were made for, is it? We are religious science. We are the Centers for Spiritual Living, and we are strong enough to look at our beautiful country and this beautiful consciousness and all the beautiful people in it and say, we still have more work we can do. To say, I have more work to do within myself. To start waking up to the ways in which I am privileged. It's not bad that I am privileged, but I personally, and Kyle personally, are no longer okay with our brothers and sister Christs not having that privilege. We are beautiful people. We are loving people. The people I know in this room are not bad. But there is something more for us to wake up to. And that is the work of religious science. That is the importance of celebrating Passover in America, is that we look back on our history and say what really was, what really has been. And then we step up into our greatness, and we step up into our Christness. Because we are going to need every part of us awake in order to move through Holy Week, in order to move through dealing with our own shadow as, in the weeks and the months and the years that follow this time when we are waking up. What I know is that we are already the Christ, each and every one of us, and that part of us is what's never going to change. That part of us is what's already waking or awake. And so this week, which is Holy Week in the tradition I was raised in, I ask you to celebrate every part of you. If you have time, come out to do the class on Saturday that I'm teaching on working with your shadow. It's traditionally a time when the Christ was in the grave. What better time to look at the parts of us we would like to leave behind in a grave? Let this week be the week you wake up. You no longer argue with the cup that's before you, being born into such a time as this to do the work that we are here to do. Not just lighting candles, but finding ways to be staunch allies to the ones we really, truly love. Whether they're gay or straight, whether they're gender fluid or binary, black or white, it doesn't really matter. These are our beloveds. And so I ask you to come with me into prayer and stay awake with me. And so in this moment of spiritual awakening, in this moment of glory for the soul, in which we rise up and see the beauty of who we are and everyone around us, as we step into that wonder and joy and good, we remember that this is what God is. Joy, good, power, peace, oneness. And in that oneness, everything is included. That which looks like love and that which looks like a cry for love, a call for love. And so in this moment of beauty and perfection and awakeness, I'm remembering the words of the poet that say, "Keep fast before me the moments of my high resolve." Thank you, Reverend. Keep fast before me these moments of awakeness. Let our greater self, who we really are in the depths of our souls, stay awake tonight in the garden. Stay awake in balance and loving all that is. And because we step into this light, into this truth, that which is good must be made manifest through us and for us, whether it's healing of the physical body or the body of our affairs or the body of our finances. That is automatically healed as we stand in the light of our truth. That is automatically moved into greater alignment with our divine truth every time we stand witness to our highest self. It's a beautiful self. And it's clothed in many, many different colors, many, many different faces, many cultures, many different ways of being. I celebrate and love it all. And I give thanks that this is spirit in its essence, its purest essence. And so all I need to do is let it be. And so it is.